The mansion stood like a palace, glowing with lights that reached into the night sky, and the driveway was lined with shining cars that showed the billionaire's wealth to anyone passing by. Inside, music played, laughter rang out, and people dressed in glittering outfits moved across the marble floors, their hands full of drinks and their mouths full of praise for the man who owned it all. He stood among them, smiling politely and nodding as they spoke, but deep inside he felt nothing. Their words were empty, their laughter hollow, and even with the fortune he had built, he could not escape the truth that he was deeply lonely. Every day was the same. Meetings, parties, business deals, and the constant noise of people who wanted something from him. Yet none of it filled the space in his heart. That night, as the party grew louder, he walked away from the crowd and stepped out onto the balcony, letting the cold night air hit his face. He looked out at the city, filled with towers of glass and endless lights, but none of it gave him peace. When he turned back, his eyes caught a sight he had never paid attention to before. In the corner of the room, almost hidden by the noise and glamour, a young maid was cleaning broken glass from the floor. She wore a plain uniform, her hair tied back, her hands moving quickly, but her tired eyes gave away her struggle. She looked invisible to everyone else, but not to him. For a moment, their eyes met, and something inside him shifted. He quickly looked away, but the image stayed in his mind. The party went on, with guests drinking and laughing louder, but his attention kept drifting back to her. He noticed the way she moved quietly, carrying trays and collecting empty glasses, ignored by everyone. No one thanked her, no one cared. She blended into the shadows of the mansion, and yet, she seemed brighter to him than all the lights in the room. He wondered about her life. Did she have a family waiting for her? Or was she just another worker lost in the endless demands of survival? The thought disturbed him because he realized he had never truly looked at the people who worked for him. Tonight, something about her made him see differently. When the last guests finally left and the mansion grew silent, he walked back into the empty hall. The music was gone, the laughter faded, and only the ticking of the grand clock echoed across the room. He found her again near the fireplace, gathering glasses into a tray. She looked up, startled to see him standing there, and lowered her eyes quickly. "You should rest," he said, his voice softer than usual. She shook her head and answered, "There is still work to do." Her voice was calm, but tired, and it carried a weight that made him pause. He stepped closer, his footsteps loud against the marble. For the first time in years, he wanted to be part of someone else's world, not just his own. "I can help," he said without thinking. She looked at him in surprise, almost afraid, and whispered, "Men like you don't help." Her words struck him like a blade, because they were true. He had lived his life in comfort, untouched by hardship, while people like her carried the burden of survival. Yet, in that moment, he wanted to prove her wrong. She stood up slowly, her figure small compared to the giant room, and he noticed her hands were red from hours of work. He reached for one of the glasses in her hand, and as their fingers brushed, a spark shot through him. It was quick, almost nothing, but it made both of them pause. She pulled back, her breathing uneven, and he stood frozen, unable to explain what he felt. The silence between them grew heavy, filled with something unspoken, something forbidden. In the emptiness of that mansion, a strange connection was born, fragile but undeniable. He knew it was dangerous, and she knew it too, but neither of them moved away. That night, the lonely billionaire and the tired maid shared a moment that neither planned. A moment that would tie their lives together in ways they could not imagine. To him, it felt like a secret that would fade with the morning sun, something hidden in the shadows of his vast house. But the truth was different. That night would not disappear. It would return one day, stronger and more powerful, carrying consequences that would change everything he thought he knew about his life. For now, he let himself believe it was just a passing moment. But deep inside, the story of his life had already taken a turn that he could never escape. The mansion was quiet after the party ended, the music gone, the lights dimmed, and the long halls filled with silence that almost felt heavy. The billionaire walked slowly through the ballroom, his polished shoes echoing against the marble, while the servants finished their work and disappeared one by one. Soon, only one person remained, the maid he had noticed earlier. She was still cleaning near the fireplace, her uniform wrinkled from the long hours, her hair falling loose from the tight knot she had tied in the morning. Her face looked pale under the dim glow of the chandelier, her tired eyes fixed on the floor as she worked. He stood there, watching her, feeling a strange pull in his chest that he could not explain. She looked up suddenly and their eyes met again, and this time neither of them looked away. He stepped closer, his voice quiet, telling her again that she should rest, but she shook her head with a faint smile, saying the house would not clean itself. He noticed her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the glasses, and without thinking, he bent down to help her. She froze, her lips parting in surprise, because men like him never touched the work of people like her. When their fingers brushed again over the rim of a glass, a soft silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the clock. She tried to step back, but he moved closer, his eyes searching hers for something more than duty, more than words. For the first time in years, he felt alive, not because of the lights, the wealth, or the endless praise of strangers, but because of the quiet presence of this one woman who stood in front of him. She tried to speak, but the words never came, and he felt her hesitation, her fear of crossing a line that could not be erased. He should have stepped back, should have let her leave, but instead he found himself asking questions about her life, questions no one had ever asked her. Did she have family? Did she have dreams? Was this work her only choice? Her answers were short, careful, guarded, but every word made him want to know more. She told him she worked to survive, that her family lived far away, that she never expected much from life. He felt guilt pressing inside him because all the wealth around them could never hide the truth that people like her carried the weight of his world on their shoulders. He saw the pain behind her eyes, and yet, he also saw strength, the kind of strength he had never known. Slowly, the conversation faded into silence again, and in that silence something unspoken passed between them. The mansion seemed to shrink around them, the empty ballroom no longer feeling grand but instead intimate, like a secret place hidden from the world. She took a step toward the door, but he caught her wrist gently, and she stopped, turning to face him. Her breath was shaky, her eyes wide, and for a moment it felt as if time had frozen. He whispered that she didn't have to leave yet, and though her mind told her to go, her heart hesitated. The space between them closed, slowly, carefully, until they stood close enough to feel each other's warmth. Her eyes searched his face, and his hand brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, and in that moment, the distance between their worlds disappeared. What followed was not planned, not spoken, but it happened, two lonely souls colliding in the silence of a house that had always been filled with emptiness. The rain outside began to fall hard, beating against the windows, thunder rolling in the distance. But inside the mansion there was only the sound of their breathing, quick and uneven. She tried once more to step away, to remind herself who he was. But when he held her close, her resistance broke. For one night, the billionaire was no longer a man of power, and she was no longer just a maid. They were simply two people who needed each other in ways they did not understand. Hours passed, the storm outside raged, and the mansion kept their secret within its walls. By the time the first light of dawn touched the sky, both of them knew what had happened could never be spoken of again. She dressed quietly, her eyes lowered, her hands trembling as she gathered her things. He stood in silence, watching her, unsure of what to say. He wanted to tell her it meant something, but the words never left his lips. She walked to the door, her back straight but her shoulders heavy, and before leaving, she looked at him one last time. Her eyes carried sadness, fear, and something else he could not name. Then she was gone, leaving him standing alone in the grand room, surrounded by silence once again. He told himself it was only one night, a secret to be locked away, something that would fade with time. But deep inside, he felt an unease he could not shake, as if the night had planted a seed that would one day grow into something far greater than he could imagine. He poured himself a drink, staring at his reflection in the glass, and whispered that it was finished, forgotten. But the truth was clear, the night was not over. It had only just begun, and its shadow would return to change his life forever. Years passed, and the billionaire's life went on as if nothing had happened, at least on the surface. He grew richer, his business expanded, and his name was printed in newspapers, linked with success, power, and influence. Yet, even with all the luxury around him, he never truly escaped the emptiness that lived in his heart. He tried to forget that night, telling himself it was just a moment of weakness, a secret hidden deep in the walls of his mansion. But sometimes late at night, when he walked through the quiet halls, he remembered her eyes, the sadness, the hesitation, and the storm that had raged outside while their lives had collided inside. He had not seen her again after that night. She had vanished, as if the earth itself had swallowed her. No resignation letter, no goodbye, only silence. Part of him wondered where she had gone, but he forced himself not to ask, not to search, because searching meant caring, and caring meant weakness. He buried it under money, work, and endless parties, convincing himself he had moved on. One rainy evening, many years later, he drove through the city in his sleek black car. The streets were crowded, filled with people rushing through the storm, holding umbrellas, covering themselves with newspapers, or huddling under old buildings. His tinted windows shielded him from the cold world outside, and yet his eyes kept wandering, drawn to the struggle of ordinary people. He told himself he was different, above them, but somewhere deep inside, he envied them too, because even in their hardships, they had families, laughter, and real connections he could never buy. The car stopped at a red light, and as he sat back, his eyes drifted to the sidewalk. That was when his heart froze. There, under the weak glow of a broken street lamp, stood a woman holding the hands of two small children. Her clothes were worn, her face pale, her hair messy from the rain. But even in her struggle, he knew her instantly. It was the maid. The same woman he had tried to erase from his memory. The same woman who had disappeared without a trace after that night. She was thinner now, her eyes heavier with years of burden. But her presence struck him like lightning. And then his gaze shifted to the children. Two little twins, no older than 6 or 7, stood beside her. Their clothes were wet and torn. Their small hands clutched at her dress as they shivered in the cold. She held out a paper cup toward strangers walking by, begging quietly, but most ignored her, some even sneered, rushing past as if she were invisible. The billionaire's chest tightened as he stared at the children. Something about them sent a chill through him. Their faces, their eyes, even the way one of them tilted his head. It was like looking into a mirror of his own childhood photographs. They looked too much like him. His breath caught, his fingers tightened around the steering wheel, and for a moment, he thought the world had stopped moving. The light turned green, and the driver behind him honked, but he did not move. He sat frozen, unable to take his eyes off the woman and the children. His mind screamed questions. Could they be his? Was that night not as forgotten as he had hoped? Had she carried his secret all these years while he lived in luxury? The weight of guilt pressed hard on his chest, and he felt exposed, as if the rain outside had washed away every lie he had told himself. The honking grew louder, pulling him back. He drove forward, but his eyes stayed locked on the rearview mirror, watching her figure fade behind him. His heart raced, his palms were wet with sweat, and his mind could not escape the faces of the twins. He told himself it could not be true, that he was imagining things, but deep down, he knew. The resemblance was too strong, the timing too perfect, the truth too heavy to deny. That night, when he returned to his mansion, he poured himself a drink, but the alcohol did not silence the storm inside him. He could still see her standing there in the rain, begging, while he sat in warmth and wealth. He could still see the twins' eyes staring back at him, reflections of himself he could no longer run from. Sleep did not come easily. He tossed in his bed, replaying the scene again and again, each time feeling more haunted. He remembered her leaving silently that morning years ago, and now it all made sense. She had not vanished. She had been hiding. She had been carrying the truth, and the truth had faces, small faces with his blood in their veins. He felt anger at himself, anger at the world, but mostly guilt that burned like fire in his chest. He knew he could not stay away. The next day, before the sun had fully risen, he found himself driving back to the same street, his eyes searching desperately among the beggars, the lost, and the forgotten. He parked his car a distance away and stepped out, his heart pounding, his hands trembling. He stood in the shadows, watching her again, watching the twins, unsure if he had the courage to step closer. For the first time in his powerful life, the billionaire felt fear, not of losing money, not of losing status, but of facing the truth that was waiting for him on that broken street corner. The billionaire returned to his mansion after that night, but the image of the woman and the twins would not leave his mind. He sat alone in his study, staring at the shelves of books he never read and the paintings that hung on the walls like trophies of a life he no longer cared about. His glass of whiskey trembled slightly in his hand as the questions raced through his head. Could they really be his children? Could one night, years ago, have created a truth so powerful that it now stood on the cold streets, begging for survival while he lived surrounded by gold and luxury? He tried to shake the thought away, telling himself it was a coincidence, that he was imagining things, that his guilt was painting pictures that were not real. But no matter how much he tried to deny it, their faces haunted him. The shape of their eyes, the curve of their smile, even the stubborn tilt of their heads, they mirrored his own childhood photographs. He set the glass down and pressed his hands against his face, breathing heavily. His mind told him to forget, to walk away, to bury it like he had buried so many other secrets. But his heart pulled him back to the street corner where she had stood in the rain with those two children. The next evening, unable to stop himself, he returned. This time he parked farther away, standing in the shadows, watching her quietly as she begged. People walked past without a second glance, some dropping coins, others pretending she did not exist. The twins clung to her dress, their small faces pale with hunger. The billionaire's chest tightened as he watched. He wanted to run to them, to ask her the truth, but fear froze him in place. What if she confirmed it? What if the children were his, and the world found out? His empire, his name, his carefully built image would crumble. The board of his company, the investors, the wealthy neighbors from the HOA, they would not forgive him for a scandal like this. He lived in a world where appearances mattered more than honesty, and the truth could destroy him. He stood in the rain, his expensive coat soaked, his heart torn between pride and guilt. Night after night he returned, always hiding, always watching from a distance. He saw how she comforted the children when they cried, how she gave them the little food strangers dropped into her cup, often going hungry herself. He saw how she wrapped her arms around them when the wind grew cold, whispering words to calm them even when her own face was full of fear. The sight tore at him. He had everything, mansions, cars, private planes. Yet his own blood, if the twins truly were his, lived without shelter, without food, without hope. He lay awake each night after watching them, torn between the man he was expected to be and the man he secretly wanted to be. His mind told him to stay silent, but his heart whispered louder with each passing day. He began imagining scenarios. What if he brought them into his home? Would people accept it? Or would whispers spread, dragging his name through scandal? What if she demanded money? What if she exposed him? He paced the floors of his mansion, restless, torn between the fear of losing his reputation and the growing ache of guilt that refused to leave him. In the mirrors he passed, he saw not a powerful man but a coward hiding from the truth. He thought about the maid's face when she left that morning years ago, silent, brave, carrying a secret that now walked beside her in the form of two children. She had raised them alone, without asking him for anything, and yet here he was, afraid of admitting what he already knew in his heart. One night, as he stood once again in the shadows, watching them huddle together under the flickering street lamp, he felt something break inside him. He could not keep hiding. He could not keep running. Whether the world judged him or not, whether his reputation survived or burned, the truth had already caught up with him. Still, as he stepped forward, ready to reveal himself, doubt gripped him once more. What if she rejected him? What if she told him the children were his, then pushed him away, saying he had no right after all the years of silence? The thought made his chest tighten, his throat close. He stopped in his tracks, torn between the need to know and the fear of what the truth would demand from him. That night he returned home without speaking to her, but his reflection in the mirror looked different now. The doubt was still there, heavy and sharp, but beneath it grew something else, a determination, fragile yet real. He knew he could not keep watching forever. The time was coming when he would have to face her, face the children, and face the truth that had been waiting for him all these years. For the first time in his life, the billionaire realized that money could not buy escape, and no matter how high the walls of his mansion, the past had already climbed over them. The billionaire could no longer bear the weight of silence, and after many restless nights, he finally gathered the courage to step out of the shadows. One evening, as the woman sat on the sidewalk with the twins huddled close to her, he walked slowly toward them, his expensive shoes splashing in the puddles left by the rain. She noticed him instantly, her body tensing, her eyes widening with shock, and for a moment she looked as if she might run. He stopped in front of her, his breath heavy, his chest pounding, and the children looked up at him with wide, curious eyes that pierced through his soul. He could not speak at first. The words stuck in his throat, trapped by years of denial. She broke the silence first, her voice low and sharp, filled with both fear and strength. "Why are you here?" she asked, pulling the twins closer as if shielding them from him. He swallowed hard, searching her face, searching for the woman he had once known, the woman whose quiet sadness had haunted him all these years. "I had to know," he whispered, his voice trembling in a way he had never allowed it to before. "Are they mine?" The question hung in the air like a blade, cutting into both of them. Her eyes glistened with tears she tried to hold back, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. The truth fell on him like thunder, shaking his world to its core. The children were his. He looked at them again, really looked, and every doubt inside him disappeared. He saw himself in their eyes, their small gestures, even in the stubborn way one of them stared back at him. His knees felt weak, his carefully built walls crumbling in an instant. He tried to speak, but his voice broke, and the woman's eyes hardened as she pulled her children even closer. "You were never supposed to know," she said quietly, her tone filled with both pain and anger. "That night, it was a mistake. I left because I had no choice. I could not raise them in a house where I was nothing but a servant, where you would deny them or hide them to protect your pride." Her words cut deeper than any insult he had ever received, because they were true. He had lived in a world where appearances mattered more than honesty, and she had chosen to face hardship rather than expose her children to a life of shame. The billionaire's throat tightened as guilt washed over him. He thought of the years he had wasted, the years the twins had grown without him, while he drowned himself in luxury and lies. He wanted to reach out, to hold them, but the woman's sharp gaze stopped him. "Don't," she warned, her voice trembling. "They don't know who you are. To them, I am mother and father both. They don't need the man who abandoned them." The words shattered him, though he knew she was right. He had been absent, blind to the truth, lost in his pride while she carried the burden alone. He tried to explain, tried to tell her that he had not known, that he had not meant to abandon them, but the excuses tasted bitter in his mouth. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much pain, too much struggle, and he realized nothing he said could erase the years of silence. The children tugged at her dress, asking softly if they could eat, and the billionaire's heart broke at the innocence in their voices. They had no idea of the storm between the adults, no idea of the secret that tied them to him. He pulled out his wallet with trembling hands, offering money, but she shook her head firmly. "I never wanted your money," she said, her tone fierce. "If I had wanted that, I could have destroyed your life years ago. All I wanted was to protect them, to keep them safe from your world." He stood frozen, ashamed, because her strength was greater than anything he had ever known. She had chosen poverty over wealth, struggle over comfort, because she believed it was the only way to protect her children. For the first time in his life, the billionaire felt powerless. He was a man who could buy anything, control anyone, bend the world to his will. But here, in front of this woman and these children, he had no power at all. All he could do was stand in the rain, staring at the family he should have known, the family he should have protected, and feel the crushing weight of the truth. He wanted to beg for a chance, to promise he would make things right, but the words caught in his throat, trapped by his own shame. The woman's eyes softened for just a moment, a flicker of the person he had once seen years ago, but then she turned away, guiding the twins down the street. He watched them disappear into the darkness, his chest aching with a pain he had never known before. That night, back in his mansion, the walls felt colder than ever, the silence heavier, the emptiness unbearable. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The children were his, and the woman he had once ignored had been stronger than he could ever be. For the first time in his life, the billionaire realized that all the money in the world could not erase the past or buy forgiveness. He sat alone in the darkness, haunted by the truth that had been revealed, knowing that his life would never be the same again. The billionaire sat in his study for hours, his mind consumed by the storm of truth he could no longer escape. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting shadows across the walls, but the warmth did nothing to ease the cold weight pressing in his chest. He had built his empire brick by brick, dollar by dollar, believing he could control everything in his life. But now he was powerless against the reality that 2 children carried his blood while growing up in hunger and despair. He tried to reason with himself, telling his mind what his heart refused to accept. If he claimed them, the world would tear him apart. The HOA would whisper scandal through the neighborhood. The board of his company would question his decisions, and the media would spread his secret like wildfire. The image he had built for decades, of a perfect, disciplined, powerful man, would collapse overnight. Yet, every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the twins. Their innocent eyes followed him, reminding him of what he owed, reminding him of the night he thought he had buried forever. He paced the room, his footsteps echoing loudly, his glass of whiskey untouched on the desk. Pride and fear fought against guilt and love, pulling him in opposite directions until he felt like he would break apart. His advisors would tell him to stay silent, to send the woman money quietly and erase the problem from the public eye. But deep inside, he knew money was never what she wanted, and money was not what the children needed. They needed a father, even if he was a stranger to them. His chest tightened at the thought of facing them, at the thought of the twins asking why he had not been there all these years. He could already hear their voices, already see their hurt, and the weight of that imagined truth pressed down harder than anything he had faced in boardrooms or business wars. Sleep abandoned him. He walked through the halls of his mansion at night, the silence mocking him, the empty rooms reminding him of the family he had denied. For the first time, the gold on the walls, the expensive art, and the polished cars outside felt meaningless. What use was wealth if the people who carried his name in their blood were begging on the streets? He stared at his reflection in the mirror and saw not a billionaire, not a leader, not a man in control, but a coward trapped between 2 worlds, the world of pride and the world of truth. His stomach twisted with fear of judgment, but his heart ached with the weight of love he had never known before. The battle within him grew stronger when he remembered the maid's words, "They don't need the man who abandoned them." He repeated them over and over until they pierced through his pride like daggers. She was right. He had not been there, not for her, not for them. But was it too late to change? Could he still fight for a place in their lives? Or was the damage beyond repair? He clenched his fists, anger rising not at her, but at himself, at the selfish man he had been, blind to the consequences of his actions. He wanted to be different, to be more than just a man of wealth, but fear whispered that he would fail, that he would ruin everything if he tried. The next evening, he drove aimlessly through the city, unable to stop himself from searching for them again. He parked in the shadows, watching from a distance as the woman guided the twins toward a small shelter where food was handed out to the poor. His chest burned as he saw her holding their hands, protecting them from the cold with her own body, while he stood hidden, afraid to step into the light. He wanted to walk to them, to kneel and beg forgiveness, but the weight of doubt chained him in place. Would she ever forgive him? Would the children accept him? Or would they see him only as the man who had left them to suffer? Back in his mansion, he poured drink after drink, but none of it silenced the voices in his mind. Pride shouted that he should protect his name, but guilt whispered louder with every hour, telling him the truth could no longer be ignored. He slammed the glass down, shattering it across the desk, his chest heaving with rage at himself. For the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to lose control, not over business, not over money, but over the truth of his own heart. He knew the battle within could not last forever. One day soon, he would have to choose, To remain the man the world respected but his children never knew, or to become the father he should have been all along, even if it meant destroying the life he had built. The whispers began even before the billionaire could prepare himself. Neighbors who once praised him now looked with suspicious eyes, their voices carrying rumors that spread through the gated community like wildfire. The HOA board, proud of their image of perfection, was quick to act. They sent him a message calling for a private meeting, and though he knew what it was about, he still went, his chest heavy with dread. The meeting was held in the community hall, a polished room filled with paintings of smiling families, green lawns, and spotless streets. Around the long table sat the board members, men and women dressed sharply, their smiles tight and their eyes sharp like knives. He entered the room with steady steps, but inside, his stomach twisted. He had faced business rivals, corporate battles, and billion-dollar negotiations, but nothing had felt like this. This was personal. This was his life on trial. They wasted no time. The head of the board cleared his throat and spoke with cold politeness, the kind that hid judgment behind false respect. "We have heard troubling things," he began. "Rumors that a woman and 2 children with connections to you have been seen in the city. People are talking, and such matters can affect not only your reputation but the reputation of this entire community." The words were smooth, but the meaning was sharp. Keep your secret buried, or risk everything. The billionaire sat silently for a moment, his hands clasped on the table, his jaw tight. The voices around him grew louder as each board member spoke in turn. Some warned of scandal. Others insisted that appearances must be protected. One even suggested that he quietly take care of the problem with money before the gossip reached the media. Their words felt like poison, and with each one, his anger grew. Finally, he lifted his head, his eyes burning with something they had never seen from him before. "They are not a problem," he said slowly, his voice steady but filled with weight. The board members exchanged uneasy looks, not expecting defiance. "They are children," he continued, his voice rising, "and those children are mine." The room went silent, the air thick with shock. Some leaned back in their chairs, others whispered to one another, but no one dared to meet his eyes. For years he had been the model of power and control, the man they admired as an untouchable figure, but now he stood before them, breaking the very rules they had built their world on. The head of the board tried to regain control, his voice sharp now. "Do you understand what this means? Do you understand the damage this could cause, not only to your image, but to all of us?" But the billionaire no longer cared about their polished image or their shallow respect. He had lived too long in silence, chained by fear of what people would say, and now the chains had snapped. "For years I cared about your approval," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I lived behind walls, protecting an image that meant nothing. But those children mean everything. I will not deny them. Not to you, not to the world, not to anyone." The board members shifted uncomfortably, some glaring, some pale with shock. They had expected him to bow, to silence the truth for the sake of appearances, but instead he stood taller than ever. "If you want to strip me of my place here," he said firmly, "then do it. If you want to drag my name through the mud, then drag it. I will not hide my blood. I will not hide my family." His voice echoed through the hall, shaking the false pride off the walls. For the first time, the billionaire felt free, not because he had wealth, but because he had chosen truth over lies. The meeting ended in silence, the board unable to break him, their whispers turning into fear of what his choice would mean for their perfect image. He walked out of the hall with steady steps, the cold night air hitting his face like a baptism of honesty. For years, he had lived as a prisoner of pride, but now he had chosen to fight, not for wealth, not for reputation, but for the children who carried his blood and the woman who had carried the burden of silence for so long. The battle with the HOA was only the beginning, but in his heart, he knew one thing: he was no longer running. The night after the HOA meeting, the billionaire sat in his mansion, but for the first time the house no longer felt like a cage. The chandeliers still glowed, the marble floors still shined, and the cars still waited in the driveway, but none of it mattered now. He had faced the whispers, the judgment, and the threats of the board, and he had not broken. For once in his life, he had chosen truth over pride, and though the road ahead would be filled with battles, he felt lighter than ever before. He knew what he had to do, and he knew there was no turning back. The next morning, he drove through the city, past the tall towers and busy streets, until he reached the corner where he had first seen her and the twins. They were there again, sitting quietly in the cold, her arms wrapped around the children, their small hands holding an empty cup that few people noticed. When she saw him step out of the car, her eyes filled with suspicion, ready to protect her children. But this time he did not stop at a distance. He walked directly to her, his voice steady, his heart racing, and he said the words he should have spoken years ago. "Come with me," he whispered. "Not for me, not for appearances, but for them. Let me give them the life they deserve." She stared at him in silence, her eyes sharp with mistrust, but the children looked up curiously, sensing something they could not understand. He went down on one knee, something he had never done for anyone, and looked directly at the twins. "I am sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have been here. I should have been your father from the beginning. But I promise you, if you let me, I will be here now." His words were clumsy, heavy with guilt, but they came from a place of truth, and the maid could see it in his eyes. She trembled, torn between anger and longing, between the years of pain he had caused and the chance of a better future for her children. Slowly, tears welled in her eyes, and she nodded. "This is not about me," she said quietly. "This is about them. If you are serious, if you are willing to fight for them, then I will give you this chance. But if you hurt them, if you ever abandon them again, I will never forgive you." He nodded, his throat too tight for words, and together they walked toward his car. For the first time, the children climbed inside, their small eyes wide at the luxury they had never known, their laughter faint but real as they touched the soft seats and stared at the glowing lights. The billionaire felt his chest swell, not with pride of wealth, but with something deeper, love, fragile and new, but stronger than anything he had ever felt. As the car drove toward his mansion, he knew the world outside would soon explode with gossip. Neighbors would talk, reporters would write, the HOA would frown, and the board of his company might even turn against him. But none of it mattered now. For years he had built his empire to hide the emptiness inside, but now, for the first time, he felt whole. When they entered the mansion, the halls no longer echoed with loneliness. The children ran through the rooms, their laughter bouncing off the walls, filling the silence with life. The maid stood quietly by the door, her eyes scanning the grand space she had once worked in, but now in a different role, not as a servant, but as the mother of the family he could no longer deny. He walked to her and said softly, "This house has always been empty. Today, it feels like home." She looked at him with cautious hope, and for the first time, the walls between them began to break. Days turned into weeks, and though challenges came, he faced them with a strength he had never known. When the HOA demanded explanations, he stood tall and repeated the truth. These were his children, his family, and no amount of gossip would change that. When the board questioned his judgment, he reminded them that a man who could face his past was a man who could lead the future. And when whispers spread through the neighborhood, he walked proudly beside the woman and the twins, no longer hiding, no longer ashamed. Slowly, the whispers began to fade, replaced by something else, respect, not for his wealth, but for his courage. In the end, the billionaire realized that the night he had once called a mistake was not a curse but the beginning of his redemption. The maid he had overlooked had given him the greatest gift of all. A family, a second chance, a reason to live beyond money and pride. And as he watched the twins laugh in the garden, their small hands reaching for his, he knew that his life had truly changed. The lonely man who once stood in a mansion full of emptiness was gone. In his place stood a father, a man who had faced judgment and fear, and found love and truth instead. And though the journey had been filled with pain, he would not change a single step, because it had led him here, to the only wealth that truly mattered.